The drums of war are beating for Venezuela. The rhetoric in the media is getting louder. But if all this feels familiar, it's because we've seen this movie before.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Hang that nigga now! I got the rope right here!
To be honest, I'm not even talking about the specifics of Venezuela, but about the patterns that led us into Iraq and whether we're seeing them again today. And honestly, I have to give the Bush administration and the neocons a tad bit of credit. At least they tried to hide their goals with the Iraq war. If you remember, the arguments for the Iraq war included weapons of mass destruction, which they later found zero evidence for after the invasion. They also tried to use the post 9/11 terrorism scare. They knew Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but in order to get the American public to buy into the war, they had to gin up the post 9/11 anti-Middle East hysteria.
Oh, Christ. We are told to believe that the fire from the jet fuel melted the steel framing of the towers, which led to their collapse. But did you know jet fuel doesn't burn at high enough temperature to melt steel?
And then finally, if those first two didn't work, they tried the spreading democracy play, talking about the poor Iraqis being ruled by a dictator.
If we must begin a military campaign, it will be directed against the lawless men who rule your country, and not against you.
Then it was WMDs, and now it's being framed as narco-terrorism.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them.
Then if that doesn't work, they'll go the humanitarian and regional stability route. Also, there is a huge gap in intelligence. Then there were some flawed WMD reports, but there was also some plausible deniability that maybe possibly Saddam had a chemical weapon in the country, as in it wouldn't shock anyone if he did, even though you need more concrete evidence to invade a country. And finally, the stated endgame of spreading democracy versus restoring democracy. In Iraq, it was about spreading democracy to the Middle East, and this time it's about restoring democracy to a society who was robbed of it. But notice the sleight of hand. Both rely on the US deciding what people of another country really want, both involve removing a dictator by force, and both assume the US can rebuild a complex society from the outside.
Suiciders to kill innocent life, who had relations with Zarqawi. Imagine what the world would be like with him in power. The idea is to try to help change the Middle East. Now look, part of the reason we went into Iraq the main reason we went into Iraq at the time was we thought he had weapons of mass destruction. It turns out he didn't, but he had the capacity to make weapons of mass destruction. But I also talked about the human suffering in Iraq, and I also talked the need to advance a freedom agenda. And so my answer to your question is that imagine a world in which Saddam Hussein was there, stirring up even more trouble in a part of the world that had so much resentment and so much hatred that people came and killed 3,000 of our citizens. You know, I've heard this theory about...
Oh my God, did you hear him stuttering? I had no idea George Bush had a stutter.
Have you ever had a dream that you want?
What the fuck are you talking about?
When you lie for so long, it's hard to keep your lies straight. Now, to be fair, Venezuela is not Iraq. Different region, different politics, different global alliances, and most importantly, the American public today is far less willing to accept wars of aggression. But motives matter, and that's where things get a little bit complicated. Just like the Bush administration had people who carried resentment from the first Gulf War into 2003, there are people around Trump who have long-standing vendettas against Maduro. Sanctioned architects, Florida politicians, exiled Venezuelan elites, all pushing intervention. There's also a genuine possibility that Trump believes the narco-terrorist narrative. We know for a fact he's not reading the CIA briefs. He's hearing Marco Rubio-like voices, hawkish advisors who filter everything he sees and likely only shows him things that fit their narrative. You know, that's why sometimes I find the Trump administration so fascinating. You can sometimes tell that there is a power struggle taking place to get Trump to do whatever the different factions in his administration want him to do. You have the more war hawkish wing of his administration, like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, who want to go around bombing everything. Some may call them Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld 2.0. And then you have the more political and America First types, who try to do political calculations on every move. People like J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. And finally, oil. Venezuela has some of the largest oil reserves in the world. A Republican congresswoman literally said the quiet part out loud.
Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, basically for three reasons. You're in Fox Business. Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. American companies can go in and fix all the oil pipe, the whole oil rigs, and everything that has to do with the Venezuelan petroleum companies, or everything that has to do with oil and the derivatives.
When we go into Venezuela, the oil companies are going to have a field day. That is not a conspiracy. That's on video. And unlike Iran, where the U.S. strike was a one-night event with no follow-up, Venezuela cannot be toppled without boots on the ground. And boots on the ground means casualties, it means folded American flags, and it means grieving parents. So the question isn't simply, is Venezuela becoming Trump's Iraq? The real question is, have we learned anything? Because while the details are different, the structure, the rhetoric, and the political incentives look disturbingly familiar. History doesn't repeat, but it sometimes rhymes. And right now, the rhyme scheme is looking a lot like 2003.